Back with today's topics. Today's topics would include why India needs global supply chains, zero orbital debris milestone achieved by ISRO, sound and stable ties required, said China between India, US interest rates and its effects on India, and free trade agreement. These are part of your preparations regarding GS2, GS3, GS1, and you can use these actually in your essay writing also. For general level understanding, these are much better to understand. So we will start with why India needs a global supply chain. When we talk about the global supply chain, electronic sector actually in India holds a significant potential. Why the electronic sector is important? Number one, because when we look about the fossil fuel and the imports that India does, there was a time actually when electronics was about to surpass, fossil fuels because India's dependence on electronics was increasing, be it smartphones or laptops or any other semiconductor materials or chips, whatever. So this was increasing our dependence on electronics. Imports were rising, and we were getting dependent on especially countries like China for our supply. Trade deficit with China was also increasing because of this particular reason. Significant amount of forex reserves that India earned was also going to actually pay for the electronic imports that we used to do. It was also causing us a trade imbalances plus even sometime a balance of payment crisis situation. So whatever we were earning through capital receipts was going actually outside. So India thought to build its capacity in the electronics. You must have seen that how the mobile value addition or mobile manufacturing in India has started to bear fruit. There was a recent news that one among one in seven that Apple produces is now being produces now being produced in our country. So that not only actually creates some sort of cushion for our trade deficits, but it also gives people employment here. And all those companies actually, rather than they would be thinking about establishing their plants in some other countries, they would be very much interested to set up plants in India. And you know that India has so much capabilities in software. So once we improve the capabilities in the hardware side, hardware and software actually can make India a potential candidate to, have the global value chains established in India itself. You must have seen that in software or in IT services, how big we are. So we were only missing the pie of hardware. So if the electronic sector or any other sector improves in the manufacturing capabilities in India regarding electronics and other hardware required, it will give India a significant jump because then the companies will be having a whole ecosystem in our country. That ecosystem would be representing software plus hardware capabilities, plus the continuous talent supply, plus the cost effective, talent supply, even the infrastructure in our country that is also on the rise because the government is spending so much amount of money. You must have known that close to 10 lakh crore rupees were spent in last year budget on infrastructure creation. So we are also trying to reduce the logistic cost that a company that a country experiences. That's why India needs a global value chain. One significant actually event that happened in the form of trade was World Trade Organization that was set up in 1995. What was the motto? To slash trade barriers among countries and adopt policies regarding the FDI. This facilitated advancement of global value chains that internationalized production fragmentation. It promoted economic growth. It also created jobs and it reduced poverty. Why? Because all those countries which were efficient in producing their own products, they were able to produce those products with more scale because trade barriers were removed. When the trade barriers were removed, then the product actually capability that one particular nation had, that particular nation, sold its product into other geographies. And those geographies actually had to accept them because of the no trade barrier regime that was brought forward by WTO. So it was a positive and negative for countries in the sense that whichever product they did not have the capability, those products went away to other countries. and the countries which were having efficient and cost-effective production of a particular product category, they were able to produce them into their own countries, and they were able to sell it. So the global value chains got established. As of now, when we talk about India's contribution to the export of the world is only 2%. So if India needs to improve its growth prospects, then country has to improve the kind of contribution that India has to the global exports. If it goes up to 3, 4, 5%, then you know how much actually can be, how much beneficial can it become for India. You must know that India has a target as of now to have somewhere around $900 billion of exports. To achieve this and to achieve, the amount of export growth that is required to sustain our GDP growth rate up to 8 or 9% requires us to improve the export sector. For export sector, we require the global value chains. And global value chains can be developed when you yourself has the manufacturing capabilities, plus you yourself have the low logistic cost to develop those particular products. When we talk about full potential of the manufacturing sector, in India, it remains untapped. Then there comes the geopolitical worries also. Geopolitical worries in the sense that after Corona, many countries have realized that we require a China plus one strategy because countries thought that we do not have they do not have dependence on China for our production. You must have known that during Corona period or just after Corona, the electronic prices or the chips and semiconductors were grown multifold. So that also creates a tension. So geopolitical thing is also one of the thing that India should consider and start building its own capability of the value chains. Critical role of technology and development. We have also taken several initiatives, either Digital India, Smart Cities, India Semiconductor Mission, production and linked incentive schemes, etc. According to estimates, India's semiconductor market will be close to $85 billion market by 2030. So when the semiconductor market is of the size of $85 billion, India cannot remain dependent on those countries, especially hostile countries. That's why comes the terminology called nearshoring or friendshoring or doing the manufacturing in your own geographies. It's an opportune time, that's why, for India to integrate in one of the most value supply chain intensive sector, that is electronics. Center has reduced import duties from 15% to 10% on mobile phone components such as battery covers, GSM antenna, cameras, lens, etc. to further boost the PLI scheme electronic manufacturing capabilities in our country because these are the inputs those are required to further the capability of our manufacturing. Because when the inputs actually will attract so much of duty, then the inputs will become even costlier than the final product actually that may come from outside countries. That's why India reduced this particular duty also. That is why it is important for us to build the capabilities to integrate India into the global value chain and raise its export potential from currently 2% to somewhere around 3 4%. So the high levels of economic growth can be sustained. Then comes the ISRO's Indian Space Research Organization's Zero Orbital Debris milestone. With the, why it is needed? Because there are increasing satellite launches by every countries across the world. But because of this, a new crisis has arisen for spacefaring nations in the form of space debris. So what are the space debris? Space debris are those satellites or parts of the satellites or parts of the rocket actually that they travel in the space and they just do a traffic jam. So once a satellite goes out of business, then it is actually left unused and it will be just rotating or revolving around all those orbits actually which they were installed. So now once a country wants to establish or push a new satellite into those orbits, it becomes difficult for them to do so. And these satellites, those new satellites are actually revolving with a greater speed or force. If they somehow come in contact with the functional satellites, then that can also cause a damage to the functional satellites. They can even destroy the functional satellites also. So number one problem is of the traffic jam. Number two problem of the destructions that they can cause to the functional satellite. And we also know, no matter actually, if they leave their orbits, and if because of the gravitational forces of the Earth, if they come and strike Earth and any part of the territory on the Earth, actually, it can also bring destruction. That's why we require the particular treaty or some sort of global framework where the space debris can be removed. That's why ISRO's recent mission is tackling the zero orbital debris. It has said that PSLV C58 XPO SAT mission has practically left zero debris in Earth's orbit. The space agency explained that the last stage of the Polar satellite launch vehicle used in this mission was transformed into a kind of orbital station before it was left to re-enter the Earth atmosphere instead of floating in the orbit. So now the thing that those are being done is the rockets actually that those are launching the satellites. Those rockets are being made to somehow re-enter into the Earth's atmosphere rather than keeping them floated in the orbit itself. And somehow the mechanism is also being drawn by which either the satellites those were launched earlier can be then broken into or can be then brought down to the Earth in a controlled and regulated manner. So ISRO said that after it completed the primary mission of injecting all satellites into their targeted orbits, the fourth stage of Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle was transformed into POEM-3. What is the POEM? PSLV Orbital Experiment Module. It was subsequently deorbitated from 650 km to 350 kilometers, and it rendered it more susceptible to being pulled towards the Earth and burning up into the atmosphere. So the POEM, so you can be also asked what is POEM. So number one, it is developed by Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. It is an inexpensive space platform. POEM, that is called POEM. You can understand it in the sense that POEM means PSLV, P for PSLV, O for orbital, E for experimental, and M for module 3. So this uses the spent fourth stage of the PSLV rocket as an orbital platform. It was used for first time in PSLV C53 mission, and ISRO had the POEM orbit the Earth as a stabilized platform to perform in-orbit scientific experiment with various payloads. So you must have understood that it was also turned into some sort, orbital mechanism, and it was turned into a stable platform to perform the in-orbit scientific experiments with various payloads. POEM is powered by solar panels mounted on the fuel tank of the rocket's fourth stage and has lithium-ion batteries. It has a dedicated navigation, guidance, and control system to stabilize its altitude along with the helium control thrusters. So the navigation, guidance, and control system has four sun sensors, a magnetometer, and gyroscope, and talks to the ISRO's Navik system for navigation, guidance, and control. That's why it has a telecommand system to communicate with the ground station. The reuse of the spent fourth stage of its rocket in its PSLV mission, ISRO actually demonstrated the reuse. So after the satellites were injected into the targeted orbits, the fourth stage that carried a student payload was moved to higher circular orbit of 443 kilometers. So you must understand that this is how actually we are planning to launch the satellites, but we are trying to make sure that the other component of the rockets actually that are mostly left floated in the orbits itself, they are either reduced in the orbit size and they are installed in those orbits where some sort of experiment with regulated payload, regulated navigation and guidance system can then be done. Even whenever we feel like bringing them to the Earth atmosphere, we can also bring them by lowering their orbits also. And it is being achieved after the three stages of the PSLV rocket has been done. And in the fourth stage, whatever the spent fuel is there, it is utilized to particularly achieve this kind of phenomena. So the rocket debris or the satellite debris in the orbitals then can be reduced by this particular manner. So this can be one of the great technologies. So you can be asked directly about the zero orbital debris, why the space debris are posing threat, or you can be asked that what do you understand by space debris, what kind of destruction it can cause, what is the ISRO doing for this, yeah, what is the program of zero orbital debris milestone. Then we come to the next topic, that is sound and stable ties in regions interest with China. You see, why this comment? Before some days, our Prime Minister gave an interview to the US American magazine, and he said that we also feel that, ties with China can be sustained to a particular level. Rather than increasing hostility, we can always have this a friendly relationship because we have the common interest. Now, China actually has responded to it and says that sound and stable ties is not only in India's and China's interest, but for the region interest also. Because China understand one thing, that India is creating groupings actually where Chinese interests are also being threatened. India is not only a part of the Quad, its relationship, bilateral relationship with South Korea, Japan, and even Asian countries is also at a significant stage. Although China is trying to woo India's neighbors like Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, even Myanmar, Maldives, but India has also kind of been very very alert in the last few years regarding these relationships. So India is not only trying to push back against Chinese designs, but it's also creating all those infrastructure or institutions where a joint fight against China can also be fought. When we talk about India's border crisis with China or unsettled border issue that we have with China, Prime Minister also talked about settling the border issues at the earliest. Because when the borders are not in the demarcated territory or zone, then you always have the problem of flaring up of the tensions on the border. You must have understood how the 2020 Galwan clash has caused the deterioration in the ties itself. China has time and again, in 2013 or earlier and even now, has tried to transgress our borders by its well-known strategy of salami slicing. You must understand what is salami slicing. So it's a technique actually by which you move forward 2 inches, then you come back 1 inch or 1.5 inches, and then you show that we have acquired one at least half an inch or 1 inch. So this is how the salami slicing is done. So piece by pieces, pieces by pieces, actually you then march into the territories of other countries. China has done it in the South China Sea nations, where actually it has artificially or somehow built the islands there, and has, been historically targeting the nations along with the South China Sea by actually, doing a land grab or somehow, causing the economic ecology zone kind of by, challenging the notion of the exclusive economic zones of those countries. So that's why it is important for us to do so in this particular manner. So that's why India's relationship with China is also important. Now we come to fourth topic, that is India to face most impact if high US interest rates are persisting. High US rates are persisting and how it can do damage to India. Whenever there are in the US actually the interest rates are higher, then those people who park their funds here in our countries or in developing countries, they will try to park their funds back to the US, because every investor actually, whether he is sitting in any part of the globe, he wants better returns on his capital. Once the US actually has higher interest rates, then number one, US actually has its own currency which is stable enough. And when the interest rate in that country is also higher, it means the investor will get better returns of his money into those territories rather than the economies those are here. Because the interest rates, those are in the developing countries. Because of the interest rate differential, and when the interest rate in developing countries are higher to fight inflation, those people actually come to developing countries only to make sure that these people are there to earn a good hefty amount of return onto their investments, but that cannot be done actually in the developed countries, because Earlier, developed countries were either having, zero sort of interest rates or negative interest rate. So when there were negative interest rate, then the loss of money was happening to them. So, and number one, so there can be a challenging because number one, there will be a flight of the money because investors would always want to go to those locations where the invest interest rates are higher and the markets are developed rather than coming to the developing markets. When there is a sudden flight of capital, actually it can cause threat to our or developing countries, threat to the developing countries' currency. Because once the capital is flown out of the country, then there will be mismanagement in the demand and supply situation because then the demands for the dollar will be higher and it will be causing a flight to those territories back. So India's currency or developing countries' currency actually can then get unstabilized. Number third is also our export will become, although a little competitive, but because of the currency rate fluctuations, the imports will become higher. And once the imports are higher, then our inflation would increase because you know how much imported inflation that we or a developing country actually has. Once the inflationary pressure are higher, then the monetary policy will take measures to curb those inflationary measures by giving a tight regulation on the interest rates. So the interest rates actually then would be in a very, very perilous kind of territory. So interest rate, when they are again, higher, then the growth prospects of the economy also improves. So these are the reasons why a stable interest rate regime in our country is required. But even, when the interest rate in other geographies, especially US and European countries increase, then it can cause damage to us. Then comes the free trade agreement that need to be delivering a buoyant external trade. What is free trade agreement? Why we sign free trade agreement? Free trade agreement is a particular phenomena in which the two countries sit together and decide about which commodities will not attract taxes or there will not be barriers of the trade. So when these two countries actually sit together and decide about the long list that in these commodities we will be having the trade, then what it does, it improves the export competitiveness of the products actually that you have the capability of. But free trade agreements have been beneficial for those countries which have export driven economic growth models because you have then not many capacity and you have the scale of production. That's why your cost of production of those commodities are also lower. But in India's case, because India has traditionally been a trade deficient country, and because of that also, because of our import needs, the free trade agreements were signed with the countries. We did not get the desired benefits because we did not have the capabilities to enhance our trade potential in export sector by long margin. Because number one, we did not have the scale of production. Number two, because of the scale of production we did not achieve, the cost of these products were even higher. Those costs, due to logistic cost or poor infrastructure, they could not compete with other countries' products also. So that caused our export not to rise above particular level. But when you allowed other countries, to export their uh, products in our territory, it means our imports increase because those countries always had the capabilities to produce things on a scale, and with reduced barriers, those actually started flooding our markets. So the inefficient production of those particular sectors, which the imports came, it also caused destruction to the manufacturing capabilities of India even in those sectors. So not only the export increased, but even because of the increase in the imports in our territory, the production days were happening for those products which we were producing earlier and were self-dependent because of the cheaper import from outside countries because of the free trade agreements. That also caused destruction. So this is somehow actually caused a major trade deficit rather than reducing the trade deficit or increasing the export potential of our country. That's why India has signed FTAs with Mauritius, Australia, and UAE, and it has replaced WTO incompatible MEIS scheme with RODTEP and implemented Free Trade Agreement 2023 with no end date to ensure continuity and responsiveness. But India has not achieved export target of $500 billion set for 2019. Its export basket expansion has become negligible, and imports from China continue to rise, expanding trade deficit. So these are the hits and misses of the uh, FTAs. So you can always write these in the examination. Thank you for listening to today's lecture. If you feel that we were able to deliver good quality,
For more such videos, you can like the button and subscribe the channel. Thank you.